Hi, and today we're going to be looking at some more of the thinking and the setting out for analysis. So always when you're reading a text, you should be asking yourself who or what are they condemning or criticizing, or any other verb that you think might be actually suited to this particular text. Who or what is portrayed, how are they portrayed, why in this way, and which words or phrases ensure that this criticism or portrayal or condemnation or justification actually occurs. Sometimes it's not actually a criticism or a condemnation, but they could be justifying a particular point of view or making some suggestions or highlighting a problem that they see in society. So you need to actually be thinking of a verb that most suits the text that you're actually looking at. And you choose the strongest words or phrases from the particular text. So if you think they're making a criticism about the government or a particular idea, you don't write down the whole quote. You look at that quote and you say, which of this quote, which word in this quote is actually the strongest word, which word is actually making that particular idea, that particular sentence, because you really should not be using the whole sentence in your essay, and you definitely don't use the quote as the idea in your analysis. You need to be summarizing it and saying what that particular quote or word is implying. It's really all about what's implied, not what is said explicitly in the text. There are things that are stated explicitly, but there are a whole lot of things that are implied, and it's the implied that you need to be picking up on. And you need to be using those verbs. I've got some examples there: justifies, criticizes, condemns, aligns, but there are so many more that you should be choosing from, and you've got word lists that you need to be using much more than you are now. We've also talked about where possible you nominalize these verbs, so you turn it from justifies to justification, from criticizes to criticism, from condemns to condemnation. Because if, for example, you're using the word criticism, you can put a tone word in front of that, so it's an accusatory criticism, or it's attacking, or any of those other words that talk about what the tone is that they've actually got. And the example we've got there is an aggressive justification of something. You need to be also determining the arguments made and the points of view given. There are usually a few of them. They can be up to 5, but sometimes only 3 or 4. And you summarize all of those ideas into a global contention. But those simple ideas would form the basis of each of your paragraphs. It's important that you center each paragraph around a series of ideas as opposed to just one quote. So let's look at writing our introduction, and we've talked about this a number of times. If you try and break it down to those 5 simple elements, you may have learnt cat padded or static padded or any of those other acronyms, but it might be easier for you to bring it down from 8 or 9 steps down into those 5 elements, and you think about what actually is covered by those 5 elements. So when we say number 1, background, what does it actually mean? So the timeline of the issue, what the actual issue is, why it's a problem, why they're arguing about it now, why this author has decided to write about it, what is the premise of their writing. So something could be occurring in society, a particular decision has been made and they've been annoyed by it, or they've been watching something happening. So you need to be somehow summarizing that whole background of the issue and the issue itself together there. The second step is textual details, so author, title, publication details, any of that sort of stuff, but that's not necessarily one sentence. These aren't sentence types, these are stuff or steps that need to be in your introduction. So you might actually include steps 1 and 2 together in 1 or 2 sentences that sort of span over both concepts there. You need to be also talking about who the audience is. It's very, very specific. There could be more than one audience type. So really the audiences are the people who are affected by this, the people who are being talked about, the people who are expected to have a reaction or being asked to make a change. Now sometimes the audience could just only be expected to have a reaction. Other times they're being asked to act in a particular way. So you need to be specific about whether they're being asked to act in a certain way or if they're just being spoken to, because the difference is very, very severe, and if you miss one of those, you can lose some points there. What is this audience being asked to think, feel, say, or do? Is it just they're asked to being able to think or feel something, or actually are they being asked to take some sort of action? And if they're being asked to take some action, you need to explain what that action is and where in the text they're being prompted to make that choice or take that action. Steps 4 and 5 is the author, any bias they have, the position they have, and the purpose they had. Maybe they're bringing a particular feminist viewpoint to this. Maybe there's a socialist viewpoint. Maybe there's an anti-government viewpoint. You need to be keeping that in mind because it actually impacts on how they write and what they are trying to make the audience think, feel, say, or do. Their purpose is what they're wanting the audience to think, feel, say, or do. Do they want a whole government change? Do they want people just to protest? Do they want a policy change? Do they want people just to say this is ridiculous, this decision? You need to be specific about what their purpose is and how their bias might actually impact that. The last thing is their overall or global contention. If you think of all the opinions they put forward throughout their piece, and they might start off saying one thing, but in reality they've used that one thing to make a bigger criticism of the government or something else later on, all those little steps turn into what their global contention is. And you're going to try and have to summarize that into 1 or 2 sentences. You're not going to be writing that as 5 or 6 sentences. It's really important this is summarized and not you're not waffling on about it for many sentences. If there is a comparison between 2 texts, you will need to introduce both texts. And that second text, if you can look at the ratio of how large or small is that second text compared to that first text. But the two usually will have some sort of relationship. There'll be a relationship between the two, and you need to discuss what that is. The second text could have, the bias could have the author could have a bias, a particular position, but once again, how does that relate to text A and what is the relationship between the two? And once again, text B's contention and possibly how it relates to text A. So it might not just be the opposing point of view to text A, but it could actually be further justifying text A because text A said, people rant, and then text B does rant. Or it could actually be further criticising text A because they're showing a particular point of view. So while text A may have looked like it was presenting a really well-balanced point of view, when you look at text B, you actually notice the laws of logic in text A's piece. So you need to talk about the relationship between text A and B. Paragraphs. It's really important that you see each paragraph as discussing a particular point of view that the author puts forward and where, why, and how that point of view is put across. The where is more than one quote. They say a particular idea and they back it up in more than one place. So you need to think about how that actually occurs. And each of your paragraphs will have that idea there, and then a number of quotes or examples are discussed. This might also be the best place for you to discuss the picture or the image or the formatting of the text. It's really important that you also talk about any shifts in argument and how ideas are built upon in a particular text. So each of these point of views can become the what of your paragraphs. And I've got 4 examples there, but you might have more. You might have a couple of less ones. But what is said or what's implied, and what is done or what is portrayed. And we've got this example here of your simple ripple task that starts with the point of view in the middle. So what is implied, what is said, what is done. And then on the outside that you have some quotes or maybe an example. And that is their quotes or examples that show where this idea is said or done. Then you explain why this idea is said or done, and then you explain how. And if you start in the middle and work your way out, that's a really simple way to get a good paragraph, a simple 4-step pattern for a paragraph of what, where, why, how. You start with what and you slowly move out to how. You should have more detail for the why and the how and less detail for the what and the where. It's the why and the how that is the analysis, not necessarily the what and the where. The big mistake a lot of people are making is starting at the where and forgetting the what. And you go, where is this said? So you say, they have said, and you put the quote there. That is not a what sentence. Even though it looks like a what sentence, it's actually a where sentence. It's where the idea is stated. So if you don't say what the actual idea is before you put the quotes in, or integrate what and where together, but at least say what the idea is, you are not giving that opinion, and you're starting with quotes, and it makes the rest of your analysis quite weak. You need to actually say what the implied idea is. That's really, really important. So what is implied or said, what is done, portrayed, described. It could be something similar to that, it could be a little bit different, but that's generally what a what sentence is. A where sentence is where is this idea suggested, where is this portrayal evident, where is this description most prominent. And that's important for development of argument. You might be saying that in the initial stages they say this particular argument, but they move from this argument to a second argument later on, or that this particular idea has prominence in the first half of the text, but in the second half of the text the argument has shifted to something else. You need to discuss how the language was built and how the argument was built. The third stage of the paragraph is why are these words and phrases used? Why has the author decided to describe so-and-so in this particular way? It's not that they have described them in that way, but they've decided to describe them in that way because that has the most impact on the audience. It reduces their credibility in the eyes of the audience, or it makes them seem more prominent or more engaged or more credible, anything like that. Why is that word or phrase done? Why is this portrayal of this person or group done? Why is this idea suggested? If you're not telling your examiner why, you haven't done enough. The last one is how. So you've said what they've said, you've quoted them, you've said why they've used this particular thing and why they've said why those words have that idea, but you don't say how those words convey that idea. And the how is how it makes the audience think, feel, say or do. How does the audience react to this particular idea? How does the audience react to this particular portrayal? How does this reaction, how does this description support their overall contention and their purpose? So if they're trying to make you hate a particular group because if you hate them you're going to want to go and do whatever action is they want you to go and do, how does describing that group in this way make that happen? And you need to describe explicitly how that happens. Obviously that what, where, why, how pattern is just repeated for every paragraph, so you just make sure you pick one set of ideas for each paragraph. Like I've discussed, you will be discussing any shifts in argument, any prominence of images or statistics, and the placement of images or ideas. Conclusions. A lot of you are really scared about conclusions. You are thinking that they're more difficult than they actually are. Essentially, conclusions are a summary of your essay and your ideas. The introduction and a conclusion bookend your essay. The introduction says, I'm going to discuss. The paragraphs is where you actually discuss, and the conclusion is pretty much, see, this is where I did discuss. So if you think of some basic steps for a conclusion, it's quite similar to an introduction because we said they've bookended, but there's some information in the introduction that you don't need in a conclusion. So let's look at these basic steps here. You just step 1, text A's author and their main contention. 2, their clear actions taken in relation to their contention. And 3, the impact on the audience. If you're comparing, steps 4 and 5 really relate to the second step, text. So relationship of text B to A and the contention and their contention stated, and the impact of text B on A and on audience. If you're running out of time, you've got 10 minutes left, let's say, and you're choosing between a paragraph and a conclusion because you have another paragraph to write and you have a paragraph and a conclusion to write, but you can only choose one, choose a paragraph. You'll get more points for a paragraph than you would a conclusion, and the examiner will assume that you ran out of time for your conclusion. But that's only if you actually are choosing between the two. All right, hopefully that's helped today, and we'll see you next time.